do so. On News 9 tonight, we are joined by Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former diplomat. He's been India's envoy to France and Gulf country Bahrain. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for being with us, and very honored to have Dr. Arvind Virmani, former CEA. Thank you so much, sir. Ambassador Kumar, coming to you very quickly. I'm sure you heard Prime Minister's keynote address, especially the conclusion. The conclusion when Prime Minister says that at a time when we mark 75th year independence, you're looking at a country with the political stability, policy continuity. You're looking at a country with commitment to democracy and diversity. India is a young nation and lot can be expected from us, and India has delivered. How do you really see the larger messaging here of Prime Minister at this particular forum?
No, I think at a time when, thank you very much, Sakal. At a time when other countries are struggling with the COVID, the message that has come out is that not only have we succeeded in tackling COVID, but that has not prevented India from embarking on far-reaching reforms. And we will get into it in a moment, if you have the time. He listed the reforms that we have been able to do. He clarified the expression Atmanirbhar, which I think has given rise to suspicion. So he was very categorical in saying this is going to make us more open towards global supply chains, and that was excellent. And more importantly, this is an appeal to countries that you are not going to get a more attractive destination for foreign direct investment than India. At a time when global FDI has dipped 1%, he says FDI in India for this year has risen by 20%. So on the whole, a very confident, positive message from the Prime Minister, I would say, Sakal.
And Dr. Virmani, your thoughts when Prime Minister actually says it, India is the leading FDI attraction, and this is especially coming at a time when we have seen in the last few weeks there's a lot of perception building by the opposition quarters on the economic front. Well, that's the fake narrative that they're wanting to really, set across. But then you have the Prime Minister telling the world with a lot of confidence that we are pretty much comfortable economically speaking, and especially we being out there attracting FDI.
So I think the number he gave was for the full year 2019, which was 20%, but this year is doing pretty well also. If you take FDI and equity, FDI is actually doing quite well. Yes, I think what I like is that, and something which one has been talking about for some time, that this is a great opportunity. I have at different times called it once in a generation or once in a lifetime opportunity to attract global value chains and global supply chains to India, given before the pandemic, the actions of the US government and the US president, and then with the pandemic disruptions of supply chains, etc. So what I think is very welcome and a little bit of a change is that we are now going out to actively and at the highest levels, including the PM, is giving this message at many different forums, including this one, that we are open for business. We are doing, we are becoming more and more attractive. The corporate income tax changes were made in 2019. The opening of various sectors, and particularly important for this forum, the defense area, which is up to 75% possible, and a flavor of all those. And then, of course, emphasizing also for a domestic audience that when we do all this approach to growth, we are not forgetting the common man.
Yes.
Ease of living is as important to us as ease of doing business, and as are the job programs and the transfer programs that we have, and those have been, for example, the free food program, etc., which was needed during the pandemic. So both the short-term measures which have become necessary, but also looking beyond and into the future and giving a message that the government cares and wants international business to come here and produce in India.
As much as we also had our Prime Minister, Ambassador Kumar, talking about the economic front scenario, but at the beginning, if you would have noticed, there was a very clear mention of the social security for poor, how that is accorded a lot of importance in domestic policies, where Prime Minister talked about Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana and various aspects associated with it at such a forum where you're looking at Indian diaspora, you're looking at the strategic partnership between India and US coming at this juncture, which has actually consolidated a lot under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership. Would you agree?
Absolutely. This has been a consistent theme in the Prime Minister's messaging. I think he talked about about globalization in one of the G20 meetings and said that should be human-centric. And he again repeated it today by saying development has to be human-centric. You cannot have development for development's sake. He then goes on to talk about the 800 million people who are entitled and are availing of the food grains for a period of 8 months. As you say, the Prime Minister, Garib Kalyan Yojana. I think he dwelt quite a bit on the COVID stimulus.
Yeah.
For a poor country to spend 10% of the GDP, which is about $260 billion on a COVID stimulus. He talks of comprehensive labor reforms, which will include social security in the future. I think on the whole, what he says to the world is, we have not allowed this crisis to go waste. We have availed of this crisis to reform, to transform, and to make sure that we use this opportunity to be prepared for a better tomorrow. So on the whole, a very quite confidence, positive messaging from the Prime Minister, I thought.
And Dr. Virmani, your thoughts on once again Prime Minister at a global forum pitching for Atmanirbhar Bharat, what it really means, and not only looking inwards but also extending outwards as well. But today he once again talked about the significance of local with global at such a forum. Do you think that's the trajectory that you're looking at from Make in India and now to Atmanirbhar Bharat?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something which actually has to be emphasized again and again because there are people who are deliberately kind of distorting it. I would say frankly that, over the last 3-4 years, I've also had sometimes doubt about whether we are going to go down a path which failed. And I think the message is very clear that the government fully recognizes that the way things were done, in the 1970s is not the way we are going. But there are many people who abroad, particularly, and Indians giving the message to these people that we are going down that same route. So it is very important, and that's good that the PM has said it now. I think at many earlier speeches, I don't remember the exact forums, but he is going on re-emphasizing that we are not going to go down that kind of closed route. It is of course, it's going to be a little bit experimental in the sense of combining global and local, but in some sense, many other countries also beginning to realize, and our government emphasize, for example, some of the examples which are given is handmade items, which could be produced in every village, but they don't have an outlet, they don't have a market. So creating e-market platforms which connect these people or villages or regions who produce these items, which can be of big demand domestically as well as globally. So explaining this concept that these are not in opposition, and the ways which, as I said, will have to be a little more innovative, which we are trying to do, and given the digital world, connecting these and getting a two-way flow is now feasible, with the communications and transport, etc. That kind of reminds me that he actually didn't mention infrastructure at all, which is interesting because in the past 3-4 years we've emphasized that a lot, and partly I think it is that infrastructure is beginning to improve gradually over last, let's say, 10 years. whether it's highways and railways. He did mention the reforms in the railways, which
Yes, yes,
actually
yes.
are quite strong, and so on. So basically, the connectivity requires both the digital internet and the physical connectivity, which is roads, railways, etc. But as I said, it was kind of interesting that that issue he did not mention, probably because globally now people are bringing, the people who actually are seriously thinking of investment have realized that the infrastructure has actually already improved quite a bit. And it's not the same as we used to think of inferior Indian infrastructure, let's say 15 years ago or 20 years ago.
So it was a very forward thinking, the keynote address had those forward thinking content to it, because you talked about the opportunities. The Prime Minister in fact talked about the opportunities, road full of opportunities ahead, particularly in the sectors from agriculture, defense, coal mining, railways, etc. And also he touched upon the agricultural reforms as well, and also not to forget, Ambassador Kumar, space and atomic energy. And with that, I want to ask you, Ambassador Kumar, as much as this keynote address had a lot to offer to the domestic audience, what would you say, you being the India's envoy, former envoy, the content, the messaging for the international audience today?
So I think you've hit the nail on the head, Sakal. There were three kinds of messaging, and I was just going to sum it up by saying, one, it was for the domestic audience, as you rightly say. There was a message for the international audience, particularly the American investors and the Western investors. He mentioned Gulf, he mentioned Australia, he mentioned Europe. And finally, he took the opportunity to set some doubts at rest. For the domestic audience, he tried to tell people that, listen, fatalities from COVID are low, the recovery rate is very high. We were trailblazers when it came to social distancing and mask, so don't worry. That is the message for the domestic audience, that we have it under control. Medical infrastructure has been ramped up, so don't worry. That is important. For the international audience, the reforms that he talked about in great detail, and for him to say that, listen, foreign direct investment has been increasing, and it is not just the United States and the Gulf, but also Australia, Europe. It is an attractive destination for investment everywhere else in the world. He hints that global supply chains must be based on trust, not just for mercenary considerations. Lastly, I'm happy, as Dr. Virmani says, I'd like to echo what he says by saying he has defined Atmanirbhar as also including that India will not be a passive market.
I was coming to that. Yes, yes.
But
India,
that it would be a manufacturing hub in a global value chain. That should put an end to everybody who says Atmanirbhar is licensed, licensed Raj and going back.
Yes,
So
in fact, I was coming to that, and because we have Dr. Virmani here. I mean, Dr. Virmani, that's a very strong statement coming in from the Prime Minister, with a very strong messaging from being seen as passive markets. Now India should be looked at as an active manufacturing hub. I think we proved it in the pharmaceutical sectors at the very outset of COVID. We are looked upon or looked up as the pharmaceutical capital of the world at a time when the globe continues to reel under pandemic. Let's agree that maybe globally things might be a little normal. India is much ahead of curve, and India was already ahead of curve.
Yeah, I think let me pick up with Ambassador's last point, which just as he did mine. I think this issue of reliability and values, and he tried to expand that it's not just reliability in the business sense, but also in terms of values, because he emphasized political stability, democracy, and diversity. So trying to give an indication, I think, I'm not sure how often he's spoken about those, so I found that quite interesting, and the contrast with the other country we all know about is quite obvious
yes.
there. So given that the value chains, so he used the word value. I often use the word supply chains because initially some of the movement will be in labor-intensive products. Value denotes kind of more technology and higher stuff, but I think he used that word value to imply both these things. He's not just talking about business values, but also democratic values and national values and people's values.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Dr. Arvind Virmani, Executive Director, former IMF and former CEA, for joining us on the show, sir, tonight. And also many thanks, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former diplomat. Really glad to have both of you on Newsnight on Doordarshan. And